The darkness of space tore open like fabric being ripped apart. First one ship appeared, then 10, then 100, then thousands. The Vexloran Imperial Armada had arrived at the edge of Earth's solar system, and they brought with them 10,000 warships that blotted out the stars. Admiral Cote stood in the command center of the orbital defense station. His hands clasped behind his back as he watched the sensors light up with red markers. Each marker represented a ship large enough to destroy a city. There were so many markers that the display looked like it was covered in blood. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission," said Lieutenant Jiho from his station. The young officer's voice was steady, but his hands shook slightly as they moved across the controls. "It's in multiple languages. They're demanding our surrender." Qt nodded slowly. He had known this day would come eventually. Humanity had been hiding for so long, pretending to be weak, pretending to be just another primitive species stumbling into the stars. But secrets never lasted forever. "Put it through," Qt said. The voice that filled the command center was deep and resonated with absolute confidence. "Primitive humans of the planet Earth, I am Emperor Valthrix of the Vexloran Empire. We have conquered 847 civilizations across this galaxy. Your world is now ours. You have 1 Earth hour to surrender completely. Refuse, and we will destroy every city, every station, every ship. Your species will serve us, or your species will end. Choose wisely." The transmission ended. Silence filled the command center. Qt could feel every eye on him, waiting for orders, waiting for hope, waiting for a miracle dot across the solar system on Earth's surface. President Soman sat in the emergency command bunker beneath Geneva. Her advisors filled the room, their faces pale with fear. Holographic displays showed the massive alien fleet, and computer projections calculated the time until Earth's destruction. The numbers were not encouraging. "We need to evacuate," one advisor said. "Get as many people off-world as possible." "We can't evacuate 8 billion people in an hour," another responded. "We need to surrender. Buy time. Maybe we can negotiate." President Soman raised her hand, and the room fell silent. She had served in the military for 20 years before entering politics. She had seen war. She knew what real power looked like. And she knew something these advisors did not. "Connect me to Admiral Qt," she said quietly. Back on the orbital station, Qt's console beeped. The president's face appeared on his private screen, visible only to him. She looked tired but calm. "Admiral," she said, "I need your assessment. Can we do this?" Qt glanced at the sensor display again. 10,000 ships. The greatest military force in known space. An empire that had crushed hundreds of civilizations. They thought Earth was helpless. They thought humans were primitive. They had no idea what was really waiting for them. "Madam President," Qt said softly, "we've been preparing for this for 30 years. The Cascade network is fully operational. All quantum platforms are online. The silence protocol is ready to activate on your command." Soman closed her eyes for a moment. Qt knew what she was thinking. Once they did this, there was no going back. The galaxy would know the truth about humanity. Earth would never be able to hide again. "How long will it take?" she asked. "Less than 2 seconds, Madam President. From activation to complete neutralization of the threat." Soman opened her eyes. In them, Qt saw the weight of the decision, but also the strength to make it. "Then we proceed. But Qt, leave the command ship intact. Let them see what we can do. Let them carry that message back to the galaxy." "Understood, Madam President." The connection ended. Qt turned to face his crew. They were all looking at him now, these young men and women who had trained for this moment, who had been told their entire careers that Earth was vulnerable, that humanity was weak, that they were the thin line protecting their home world from the dangers of space-time to tell them the truth. "Listen carefully," Kite said, his voice carrying to every corner of the command center. "What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest level. 30 years ago, humanity discovered something, a way to weaponize quantum mechanics on a scale never before imagined. We kept it secret. We pretended to be weak. We let the galaxy think we were just another primitive species barely capable of space flight." Jiho's mouth had fallen open. Around the room, other officers were staring in disbelief. "We did this because we wanted to be left alone," Qute continued. "We didn't want to conquer. We didn't want to dominate. We just wanted to live in peace. But the galaxy doesn't leave anyone alone. And now, the Vexlorans have come to our home. They've threatened our families. They've given us 1 hour to surrender or die." Qute walked to the main display and touched a control. The screen changed, showing a map of the solar system. But now, new markers appeared. Thousands of them, hidden in asteroid belts, buried in moons, floating in the empty dark between planets. Each marker represented a quantum weapon platform, invisible to conventional sensors, capable of destruction beyond imagination. "This is the Cascade Network," Qute said. "This is what we've built while the galaxy wasn't watching. This is why we're not afraid of 10,000 warships." The command center was dead silent. Then Jiho spoke up, his voice barely a whisper. "Sir, what are we going to do?" Qute looked at the young lieutenant. Then he looked at each member of his crew in turn. "We're going to show the Vexloran Empire why they should have left Earth alone. We're going to end this invasion in seconds. And then we're going to have to live with what we've done." He turned back to the controls. His fingers moved across the command console, entering the authorization codes that only he and a handful of others knew. The silence protocol woke up, its quantum processors calculating targeting solutions for every single Vexloran ship simultaneously. "All stations, this is Admiral Qute. Activate the silence protocol. Authorization code, Sierra Alpha 7749. Target all hostile vessels except the command ship. Prepare to fire on my mark." Across the solar system, hidden weapons that humanity had spent decades building hummed to life. Quantum entanglement connected them all in a single network that transcended space and time. They were ready. Qute took a deep breath. In the Vexloran fleet, Emperor Valthrix sat on his throne, confident and comfortable, already planning how he would divide Earth's resources among his generals. He had no idea that his entire armada had less than 2 seconds to live. "Fire," Qute said quietly, and everything changed. Dr. Hannah had been 26 years old when she first understood that humanity could destroy anything in the universe. It happened in a laboratory deep beneath the Swiss mountains, in a facility so secret that it didn't appear on any map. Her mentor, Dr. Kim Wujin, had just shown her the first successful test of macroscopic quantum entanglement. "Look at this," Wujin had said, pointing at 2 metal spheres separated by 3 meters. "Watch what happens when I change the state of this one." He pressed a button. A sphere on the left had turned red hot, its temperature spiking to 1,000 degrees in an instant. And at the exact same moment, the sphere on the right did the same thing. No energy beam connected them. No signal passed between them. They were quantum entangled, and what happened to one happened to the other, instantly, regardless of distance. "Now imagine," Wujin said softly, "that we can entangle objects at any distance. Across a room, across a planet, across a solar system. And imagine we can increase entropy in one of those objects. We could make things fall apart at the molecular level. We could destroy anything, anywhere, instantly." Hannah had stared at the spheres, her mind racing with the implications. "This is a weapon," she whispered. "This is the weapon," Widgeon corrected. "This makes nuclear bombs look like children's toys. This makes every weapon humanity has ever created obsolete. And Hannah, we need to keep this secret. If the galaxy finds out what we can do, they'll either try to steal it or destroy us to prevent us from using it." That was 30 years ago. Now, Hannah stood in the same laboratory, older and wiser, watching her own student work on the very technology she had helped perfect. Dr. Yuna was brilliant, perhaps even more so than Hannah had been at her age. She understood not just the theory, but the practical applications. The ways to make the quantum weapons smaller, more efficient, more devastating. "The Cascade network is activating," Yuna said, looking up from her console. Her face was pale. "They're really doing it." Hannah nodded. She had known this moment was coming. They all had. The military strategists, the politicians, the scientists. They had spent decades preparing for the day when Earth could no longer hide its true power. "Are you afraid?" Hannah asked. "Yun. I thought about it for a moment. Yes, but not of the aliens. I'm afraid of us, of what we've become. We built weapons that can erase entire fleets from existence in seconds. What does that make us?" It was a question Hannah had asked herself many times over the years. She didn't have a good answer. In another part of the world, buried beneath a mountain in Colorado, Colonel Dongwu watched the same activation sequence from the Secret Weapons Division Command Center. He was a military man through and through, with 40 years of service and more scars than he cared to count. He had fought in 3 wars before humanity even reached the stars, and he had been there from the beginning of the quantum weapons program. "Status report," he barked at his staff. "All quantum platforms online and operational," one officer reported. "Entropy cannons charged to full capacity. Temporal anchors ready for deployment. We have targeting locks on all 10,000 hostile vessels." Dongwu allowed himself a small, grim smile. The Vexlerans had no idea what was about to hit them. They came here with their grand fleet, their ultimatums, their threats. They thought humanity was weak. They were about to learn a very painful lesson. "Sir," another officer said hesitantly, "some of those ships probably have families aboard. Non-combatants. The Vexlerans are known to travel with support staff. Civilian contractors." Dongwu's smile faded. "I know, Lieutenant. War isn't clean. War isn't fair. But they came to our home and threatened to destroy our cities, to enslave our people. We didn't start this. We're just going to finish it." The officer nodded and returned to his station. Dongwu knew the young man was troubled by what they were about to do. Hell, Dongwu was troubled by it too. But troubling or not, it was necessary. Humanity had hidden for 30 years, precisely so they wouldn't have to use these weapons. But the galaxy hadn't left them alone. The galaxy never left anyone alone. Commander Minji sat in the captain's chair of the stealth ship Whisper, hidden in the shadow of one of Jupiter's moons. Her ship was part of the secret fleet that nobody knew existed. Vessels that used quantum technology to become completely invisible to sensors. She and her crew had been watching the Imperial Armada since it arrived, tracking its movements, calculating its capabilities. "Captain," her tactical officer said, "we're receiving the silence protocol activation signal. Orders are to observe and record only. We are not to engage." Minji nodded. The stealth fleet wasn't needed for this fight. The Cascade network would handle the Vexlerans. Her job was to watch, to learn, to gather intelligence. And if anything went wrong, to carry the knowledge of what happened here to the next generation of humanity. She looked at the tactical display showing the Vexleran fleet. So many ships, so much firepower, and in less than 2 seconds, they would all be gone. She felt a strange mixture of pride and horror at what humanity had built. Back on the orbital defense station, Lieutenant Geo was trying to process everything Admiral Qute had just revealed. The Cascade Network, the quantum weapons, the 30 years of deception. It was too much to take in all at once. "Sir," Geo said carefully, "why keep it secret from us? From your own people? We're the military. We're supposed to know these things." Qute turned to look at him. The Admiral's face was lined with age and responsibility. "Because, Lieutenant, some secrets are too heavy for everyone to carry. We kept this classified because we didn't want humanity to become a warrior race. We didn't want our entire civilization to revolve around these weapons. We wanted people to live normal lives, to dream about exploring the stars peacefully, to raise families without the weight of this knowledge on their shoulders. But that wasn't our choice to make," Geo protested. "The people had a right to know." "Perhaps," Qute agreed. "But rights and reality don't always align, Lieutenant. We made a decision. Maybe it was the wrong one. History will judge us. But right now, in this moment, I'm more concerned with keeping humanity alive than with being morally perfect. On Earth, in cities across the planet, people gathered in streets and homes, watching news broadcasts that showed the alien fleet on sensors. They didn't know about the quantum weapons. They didn't know about the Cascade Network. They thought their world was about to end. Parents held their children. Lovers embraced. Some prayed. Some cried. Some stood defiant, ready to fight impossible odds with whatever they had. They were all about to witness something that would change humanity's place in the galaxy forever. President Soman stood in the command bunker, surrounded by advisors who still didn't know the full truth. She had made the hardest decision of her life, authorizing the use of weapons so powerful that they would either save humanity or reveal them as monsters to the rest of the galaxy. "Madam President," her military advisor said urgently, "the Vexloran fleet is beginning its attack run. Sensors show thousands of plasma torpedoes launching. Impact in 40 seconds. Soman didn't flinch. "How long until the silence protocol completes its sequence?" 3 seconds, Madam President." She nodded. 3 seconds to save the world, or 3 seconds to doom it in a different way. Either way, there was no turning back now. In the laboratory, Hana watched her screens as quantum entanglement signatures spiked across the entire solar system. The Cascade Network was fully active now, connected to every Vexloran ship through invisible threads of quantum mechanics. In moments, the entropy cannons would fire, and those ships would simply cease to exist in any meaningful way. "May we be forgiven," Hana whispered, "for what we're about to do." It took 1.7 seconds for the Vexloran Imperial Armada to die. In the first 0.3 of a second, the Cascade Network locked quantum entanglement onto every hostile ship simultaneously. The targeting was so precise that it identified individual atoms in critical ship systems: reactors, life support, weapons arrays, hull integrity fields. Everything was marked, measured, and targeted with absolute accuracy. Emperor Valthrix sat on his throne aboard the flagship Eternal Dominion, watching displays that showed Earth hanging in space like a blue jewel waiting to be plucked. His commanders reported that the human defenses were minimal, their weapons primitive, their surrender inevitable. He allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Another world conquered. Another species brought under Vexloran rule. It was almost too easy. And his science officer spoke up, confusion in her voice. "Sire, I'm detecting unusual quantum fluctuations throughout the fleet. I've never seen readings like this before." Valthrix frowned. "Explain." "I cannot, sire. It's as if something is connecting to our ships at a subatomic level. But that should be impossible. No known technology can." She never finished the sentence. at zero point 0.3 seconds, the entropy cannons fired. From hidden platforms scattered across the solar system, quantum weapons reached out and touched the Vexloran ships. What happened next was not an explosion. There was no fire, no blast wave, no dramatic destruction. It was something far more terrifying. The ships began to unmake themselves. Molecular bonds broke. Atoms separated. The careful organization that held metal, circuits, and living tissue together simply stopped working. Hulls dissolved like sugar in water. Weapon systems crumbled into component particles. The great warships that had conquered hundreds of worlds fell apart at the most fundamental level of reality. On one destroyer, a Vexloran warrior was walking down a corridor when the entropy wave hit. He felt nothing. There was no pain. He simply stopped being solid matter and became a cloud of atoms that dispersed into space. The same thing happened to every living being on that ship. To every living being on 9,999 ships. Lieutenant Chiho watched from the orbital defense station, his face pressed close to the sensor display. "My God," he whispered. "They're just ... vanishing." Admiral Kyute stood beside him, his expression grim. "Not vanishing, Lieutenant. Being reduced to their component atoms. It's cleaner than explosions, more efficient than conventional weapons. And it leaves no doubt about the outcome." Chiho felt sick. He had trained for combat, prepared himself to fight and possibly die defending Earth. But this wasn't combat. This was erasure. This was the deletion of 10,000 ships and everyone aboard them, accomplished faster than a human heartbeat. At 0.8 seconds, the temporal anchors activated. Some Vexloran ships had managed to launch escape pods in those first fractions of a second, desperate attempts by crews who suddenly understood they were dying. The pods shot away from the dissolving vessels, their occupants hoping for rescue, for survival, for anything. The temporal anchors froze them in place. Time itself stopped for those pods, locking them in a bubble of frozen causality. From the outside, they appeared as motionless objects hanging in space, their occupants trapped in a single instant that would last until someone chose to release them. Dr. Hannah monitored the quantum signatures from her laboratory, ensuring the weapons functioned exactly as designed. The readings were perfect. The entropy cannons had targeted only the Vexloran vessels, with no collateral damage to Earth's ecosystem or civilian stations. The temporal anchors had frozen precisely the objects she had calculated. Everything was working according to plan. She still felt like a monster. At 1.2 seconds, only one Vexloran ship remained intact. The Eternal Dominion hung in space, surrounded by an expanding cloud of atoms that had once been the greatest military fleet in the galaxy. Emperor Valthrix stood on his bridge, staring at displays that showed nothing but death and dissolution. His commanders were shouting. His crew was panicking. Alarms screamed throughout the ship. Then every surface inside the ship began to glow. Walls, floors, ceilings, control panels, everything lit up with a soft blue light. And in that light, words appeared, written in every language the Vexlorans knew, burned into every surface through quantum manipulation, was a simple message. Leave, tell them what happened here. Valthrix read the words, his hands gripping the arms of his throne, so hard his claws drew blood from his own palms. In less than 2 seconds, humanity had destroyed his entire armada. Not through overwhelming numbers, not through clever tactics, through technology so advanced that it made his own weapons look like primitive clubs. "Get us out of here," he said quietly. "Activate the jump drive, now." His navigator was shaking. "Sire, the jump drive needs 10 minutes to charge." "Then charge it," Valthrix roared. "And pray to every god in the cosmos that these humans give us those 10 minutes. On the orbital defense station, Kyute watched the Eternal Dominion begin its slow preparation for retreat. He had orders to let them go. Let them carry the message. Let the galaxy know that Earth was not to be touched. But watching that ship escape, while knowing the carnage they had just unleashed, sat heavy on his conscience. "Sir," Jiho said, his voice hollow, "the Vexloran flagship is charging its jump drive. Should we stop them?" Pute shook his head. "No, Lieutenant. Let them run. Let them tell their story. That ship is worth more to us intact than destroyed. Fear is a powerful weapon, and right now, Emperor Valthrix is learning to fear humanity." At 1.7 seconds, it was over. The Cascade network powered down. The quantum weapons returned to standby mode, invisible once more to conventional sensors. The battlefield was clean. There was no debris, no wreckage, no bodies floating in space. The Vexloran Armada had been converted into loose atoms that spread harmlessly across the solar system. Indistinguishable from cosmic dust, only the frozen escape pods remained as evidence of what had happened, and the single flagship waiting desperately for its jump drive to charge. President Somin opened a communication channel to the Eternal Dominion. Her face appeared on every screen throughout the Vexloran ship. She looked tired, and there was no triumph in her expression, only weariness and determination. "Emperor Valthrix," she said calmly, "I want you to understand something. We did not want this. We hid our capabilities precisely because we hoped to avoid conflict. We wanted to explore the stars in peace, to meet other species as friends and partners, not as conquerors or victims." Valthrix stared at her image, still processing what had happened to his fleet. "But you came to our home," Somin continued. "You threatened our families. You gave us 1 hour to surrender or die. So we defended ourselves. We did what we had to do. And now you will leave our system. You will return to your empire. And you will tell them what happened here. Tell them that Earth is not to be disturbed. This is your only warning." She paused, and her voice softened slightly. "We have frozen your escape pods in temporal stasis. The people inside are not dead, but they are not alive either. They exist in a single frozen moment. When you reach the edge of our solar system, we will release them. They will remember nothing of what happened. Consider it a mercy, Emperor Valthrix. Consider it more mercy than you would have shown us." The communication ended. Valthrix sat in silence, surrounded by his terrified crew. After what felt like an eternity, the jump drive finally charged. The Eternal Dominion tore open a hole in space and fled, carrying with it the knowledge that humanity was not the primitive species they had believed. On Earth, people watched broadcasts that showed the alien fleet simply vanishing from sensors. Most assumed the aliens had left on their own. Some suspected something more, but very few knew the truth about what humanity had done in less than 2 seconds. In the command bunker, President Somin sat down heavily in her chair. Her advisors were celebrating, cheering at their unexpected survival. But she felt no joy, only the terrible weight of the decision she had made. Admiral Qute shut down his command console and looked at his crew. They were all staring at him, waiting for him to say something, to make sense of what they had just witnessed. "Remember this moment," he said quietly. "Remember how easy it was, how fast, how clean, and remember the responsibility that comes with having this power. We are not conquerors. We are not monsters. We are protectors. And we just showed the galaxy what happens when you threaten our home." He paused, looking each of them in the eye. "Now we have to live with it." 3 weeks after the Vexloran Armada was destroyed, a journalist named Tayo broke the story that changed everything. He had been investigating unusual energy signatures around Jupiter when he found traces of the quantum weapons platforms. His article, published simultaneously across every major news network on Earth, was titled simply, Our government lied. Earth has weapons that can destroy anything. The public reaction was immediate and explosive. Protests erupted in every major city. People demanded answers. How long had these weapons existed? Why were they kept secret? What else was the government hiding? The trust that had held human civilization together began to crack. Yunji, a peace activist from Seoul, organized the largest demonstration. She stood in front of the United Nations building in Geneva, speaking to a crowd of over 1 million people who had gathered from across the planet. "They kept this secret from us," she said, her voice amplified across the crowd. "They built weapons capable of erasing entire fleets from existence, and they never asked our permission. They never held a vote. They never gave us a choice. They decided in secret to make humanity into something we never agreed to become." The crowd roared in agreement. Signs reading, "No secret weapons, and we demand transparency," filled the streets. But not everyone agreed. Counter-protesters also gathered, arguing that the secrecy had saved humanity, that without those weapons, Earth would now be conquered or destroyed. In the orbital defense station, Lieutenant Jiho found himself unable to sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the Vexloran ships dissolving into atoms. He had joined the military to protect people, not to witness wholesale erasure of life on such a massive scale. The fact that it was justified, that it was necessary, didn't make it easier to bear. He went to find Admiral Qute, who was still on duty despite the late hour. The Admiral stood at a window overlooking Earth, his reflection ghost-like in the transparent metal. "Can't sleep either?" Qute asked without turning around. "No, sir," Jiho replied. "I keep thinking about those ships, about the people on them. They had families, didn't they? Children, dreams. They were just following orders, and we erased them in less than 2 seconds." Qute was quiet for a long moment. Yes, they were following orders. Orders to conquer us. Orders to enslave us if we resisted. Does that justify what we did? I don't know, Lieutenant. I've asked myself that question every day since we fired those weapons. So how do you live with it, sir? Qute finally turned to look at him. The Admiral's eyes were tired, haunted. I don't, Lieutenant. None of us do. We just keep going because stopping isn't an option. We carry the weight because someone has to. That's what responsibility means. Not the ability to act, but the willingness to live with the consequences. Across the galaxy, the news of what happened at Earth spread like wildfire. Emperor Valthrix had returned to the Vexloran homeworld a broken man. His report to the Imperial Council was met first with disbelief, then with demands for proof, and finally with terror as the evidence became undeniable. The council chamber was silent as recordings of the battle played on massive screens. Council members watched the Vexloran Armada simply cease to exist. They watched the precision, the speed, the absolute totality of the destruction. And they realized that their empire, which had dominated the galaxy for 3,000 years, was suddenly and completely vulnerable. What do we do? One council member asked, her voice small and frightened. No one had an answer. But the Vexlorans were not the only ones watching. The merchant guilds, vast trading networks that connected hundreds of worlds, debated what Earth's weapons meant for commerce. Could trade routes be trusted if one species could destroy entire fleets instantly? Some saw opportunity Earth might revolutionize technology and create new markets. Others saw only danger. The Scientific Concordat, an alliance of research-focused civilizations, desperately wanted to understand the quantum technology humanity had developed. But they were terrified to approach Earth to ask, what if humanity perceived questions as threats? What if curiosity was answered with annihilation? The warlord clans, smaller aggressive species that controlled territory through military might, held emergency councils. Some argued for a preemptive strike against Earth before humanity could spread its influence. Others argued for immediate peace treaties. The debates grew heated, with some clans nearly coming to war over the question. On Earth, the political situation grew more complicated by the day. Sang Hoon, a charismatic politician from the Asia-Pacific Alliance, began giving speeches arguing that Earth should use its military superiority to establish control over nearby star systems. Why should we hide? He asked crowds that grew larger with each appearance. Why should we cower? We have the power to ensure that no alien empire ever threatens humanity again. We could create a human sphere of influence, guarantee our safety for generations to come. Isn't that worth considering? His words found an audience among those who are tired of fear, tired of hiding, tired of being the underdog in a galaxy full of empires. Dr. Hana watched these developments with growing alarm. She met with Admiral Qute in a secure location, away from the protests and the political maneuvering. We built these weapons to protect ourselves, she said. But now that the galaxy knows about them, we've become exactly what? We feared the threatening unknown. Every species out there is wondering if we'll use these weapons against them next. Qute nodded grimly. I know. President Somin is facing calls both for more military buildup and for complete disarmament. The moderates want transparency, the hawks want expansion, and the pacifists want us to destroy the quantum weapons entirely. Can we destroy them? Hannah asked. The knowledge exists. The technology is understood. Even if we dismantled every weapon platform, any nation could rebuild them in a few years. Which is why this isn't really about the weapons, Qute replied. It's about what kind of species humanity wants to be. That's the question we're all avoiding, because it's the hardest one to answer. Dr. Yuna, Hannah's student, had her own struggles. She had helped perfect the quantum weapons, made them more efficient, more deadly. Now she couldn't walk down a street without wondering if people would hate her if they knew her role in the program. She had saved humanity, and she felt like a criminal. One evening, she met with a group of other scientists who had worked on secret programs. They gathered in a small apartment in Tokyo, speaking quietly about shared guilt and shared responsibility. We did what was necessary, one scientist said. History will judge us, but we're alive to be judged. That's what matters. Is it? Yuna asked. Or have we just delayed judgment? What happens the next time someone threatens us? Do we erase them too? How many times can we do this before we stop being the good guys? No one had an answer to that either. Then, 8 weeks after the destruction of the Vexloran Armada, something unexpected happened. A small fleet of ships approached Earth's solar system, but these ships were transmitting peaceful intentions on every frequency. They came from 15 different species, none of them particularly powerful by galactic standards, all of them desperate to talk. President Somin received their message in the command bunker. The lead diplomat, a being that looked like a walking crystal formation, spoke carefully. People of Earth, we come not to threaten, but to negotiate. Our civilizations are small, weak by galactic standards. We have lived in fear of empires like the Vexlorans for centuries. Some of us have been conquered before. Some of us live under constant threat. We saw what you did to the Vexloran Armada. We understand your power, and we wish to know your intentions. The crystal being paused, and something like emotion flickered in its multifaceted form. Will you be another empire we must fear? Or could you be something different? That is what we have come to ask. Somin sat in her chair, surrounded by advisors, facing the weight of a question that would determine humanity's future in the stars. The galaxy was watching. Humanity was divided, and she had to find an answer that would satisfy both her own conscience and the needs of her species. We need to call a summit, she said finally. Here on Earth, representatives from across our world and from these alien delegations. We need to decide as a species and with the input of our galactic neighbors, what kind of power we want to be. Colonel Dong-Wu, watching from his military command center, shook his head. A summit. Politicians talking while the galaxy waits to see if we'll conquer them or save them. This is going to be a disaster. But Qute, hearing the same news, allowed himself a small smile. Maybe, he said. Or maybe it's exactly what we need. We can't make this decision alone, and we shouldn't. The weapons are ours, but their consequences belong to everyone. The summit was scheduled for 3 months away, to be held in Geneva. The galaxy held its breath and waited to see what humanity would decide. The Geneva summit lasted 47 days and changed the galaxy forever. Thousands of delegates filled the conference halls. Humans from every nation sat alongside representatives from 15 alien species. Outside, protesters from both sides demonstrated peacefully, holding signs calling for everything from galactic dominance to complete disarmament. The whole world watched, and through subspace transmissions, dozens of other civilizations watched President Soman open the summit with words that surprised many people. She didn't boast about Earth's power. She didn't make threats or demands. Instead, she spoke about fear. We built our weapons because we were afraid, she said. Afraid of being conquered. Afraid of being enslaved. Afraid of the powerful empires that dominate the galaxy and crush anyone weaker than them. That fear drove us to create technology that could destroy entire fleets in seconds. And now you're all afraid of us. So the question before this summit is simple. How do we move beyond fear? The alien delegates listened carefully. The crystal being who had first contacted Earth spoke next. Its name was Crystallith, and it represented a coalition of small species. Your fear was justified, Crystallith said, its voice like wind chimes. We too have lived with that fear for centuries. But now we face a new fear. We have seen what your weapons can do. How do we know you will not turn them on us? How can any species feel safe in a galaxy where one world can destroy anything in seconds? Sang-Hoon, the politician who advocated for human expansion, stood up from the human delegation. Perhaps they shouldn't feel safe, he said bluntly. For too long, might has made right in this galaxy. Empires like the Vexlerans have conquered hundreds of worlds because they had the power to do so. Now humanity has greater power. Maybe that's what the galaxy needs, a new dominant force that will bring order. The alien delegates shifted nervously. Crystallith's surface flickered with what might have been distress. But then Dr. Hana stood up, her credentials as chief scientist giving her words weight. Respectfully, Representative Sang-Hoon, that's exactly the wrong lesson to learn from our weapons. We didn't create the quantum technology to dominate others. We created it to defend ourselves. If we become another empire using force to control others, we'll just perpetuate the same cycle of fear and violence that drove us to build these weapons in the first place. The debate continued for days. Hawks argued for military superiority. Pacifists demanded the weapons be destroyed. Pragmatists sought middle ground. The alien delegates mostly listened, trying to understand what kind of species humanity truly was. On the 12th day of the summit, something unexpected happened. A new delegation arrived, representatives from 3 of the galaxy's oldest civilizations, species so advanced and so isolationist that most people had thought they were myths. They had remained neutral for thousands of years, watching galactic events, but never interfering. Their spokesperson was an energy being that called itself Luminose. It had no physical form, just light and consciousness held together by technology beyond current understanding. We have come, Luminose said, because this moment will define the galaxy's future. We have seen empires rise and fall. We have watched species gain power and misuse it. We have waited to see if any civilization would choose a different path. Humanity has reached a crossroads. What you decide here will echo for millennia." The room fell silent. Even Sang-hoon looked awed by the presence of these ancient beings. Luminos continued, "Your weapons are fearsome, but they are not unique. 3 other species in galactic history have developed similar technologies. 2 used their power to conquer and eventually destroyed themselves through internal conflict. The 3rd chose isolation and stagnated, contributing nothing to the wider galaxy. You have a chance to find a 3rd path, one that neither of those species achieved." "What path?" President Soman asked. "Responsibility," Luminos replied simply. "Use your power not to conquer or to hide, but to protect. Not just yourselves, but others who cannot protect themselves. Become guardians of peace rather than enforcers of your will." Over the following weeks, a proposal took shape. It was called the Guardian Compact, and it was unlike any treaty the galaxy had ever seen. The key principles were argued over, refined, and finally agreed upon. First, Earth would share the theoretical foundations of quantum weapons technology with any species that wanted to learn. But the knowledge would be released slowly, through an educational program that would take generations to complete. This would prevent any one species from quickly gaining a decisive advantage, but would ensure that eventually the technology would be available to all. Second, Earth agreed to use its weapons only in defense of unprovoked aggression against any species, not just humanity. If an empire attacked a weaker world, Earth would intervene. But Earth would never initiate conquest or force its will on others. Third, all signatories to the compact had to agree to universal laws against wars of conquest and slavery. Species could defend themselves, could have conflicts over resources or territory, but the era of great empires crushing smaller civilizations had to end. Not everyone agreed. Sang-hoon walked out of the summit, calling the compact weakness disguised as virtue. Some alien species refused to sign, preferring to maintain their independence. Several human nations were divided on the issue, but enough agreed. Enough to make it work. Admiral Kyute found Lieutenant Chiho looking at the Earth through the observation window of the orbital station. The younger officer seemed more at peace than he had been in weeks. "Still troubled by what we did, Lieutenant?" Kyute asked. Ho thought about it. "Always, sir. I don't think that guilt will ever fully go away. But I understand it better now. We had terrible power and a terrible choice to make. We chose to survive. Now we have to choose what we do with that survival. The compact isn't perfect, but it's better than the alternatives." Kyute nodded. "That's the best we can hope for, I think. Not perfection, but better. One step at a time toward a galaxy where power is used to protect rather than to dominate." Dr. Hana and Dr. Yuna worked together to establish the Quantum Education Institute, the organization that would slowly share humanity's weapons technology with other species. The first classes would not begin for 5 years. The curriculum would take 50 years to complete. It was designed to ensure that understanding came with wisdom, that power came with responsibility. "Do you think it will work?" Yuna asked as they reviewed the first lesson plans. Hana smiled. "I think it's worth trying. Our weapons bought us a chance to do something different. Now we have to prove we deserved that chance." Colonel Dong-Wu, stubborn to the end, remained skeptical. But even he admitted that the galaxy was calmer after the compact was signed. Reports of aggressive fleet movements decreased. Small species that had lived in fear began to hope. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was something. President Soman, exhausted by the summit, announced she would not seek another term. She had guided humanity through its most dangerous crisis, but she felt the future should be shaped by others. In her final speech as president, she said something that resonated across the galaxy. "We discovered we had the power to destroy. That was terrifying. But then we discovered we had the power to choose. That was liberating. The galaxy doesn't need another empire. It needs guardians who remember what it felt like to be afraid, and who choose to make sure others don't have to live with that fear. 20 years after the Vexloran Armada was destroyed, a young human cadet named Nari graduated from the Galactic Defense Academy. It was the first institution where humans and aliens trained together, learning not how to conquer, but how to protect. Her class included students from 12 different species. They studied tactics, diplomacy, quantum mechanics, and ethics. They learned the history of galactic conflicts and the principles of the Guardian Compact. And they learned about the day when Earth destroyed 10,000 ships in 1.7 seconds. NAR. I stood in the memorial garden that had been built to honor those who died that day. It was a quiet place, filled with plants from both Earth and Vexloran worlds. A reminder that even enemies shared the same basic needs and dreams. That an elderly Vexloran approached her. He was bent with age, his scales dulled by time. He had been on leave when the Armada was destroyed, one of the few survivors from that fleet. He visited the memorial every year. "You're human," he said, his voice carrying the accent of his species. "Yes, sir," Nari replied respectfully. They stood together in silence for a while, looking at the memorial wall that listed the names of every being who died that day. 10,000 ships, hundreds of thousands of lives, all ended in less than 2 seconds. "Your people destroyed my fleet," Vexloran said finally. "I lost friends, colleagues, my commanding officer. Everything I had known was erased in an instant." Nari didn't know what to say. She started to apologize, but the Vexloran raised a hand to stop her. "But then your people spent 20 years teaching us how to defend ourselves. You shared your technology. You helped rebuild our economy. You didn't conquer us, even though you could have." He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much death. "I don't understand humans. You can destroy anything, but you choose to protect instead. Why?" Nari thought about everything she had learned at the academy, about the history she had studied, about the principles she had been taught. "Because we remember what it felt like to be afraid. We remember hiding in space, pretending to be weak, hoping the galaxy would leave us alone. We don't want anyone else to have to hide like that." The Vexloran was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised her. "Perhaps there is hope for this galaxy after all." He left her there in the garden, and Nari looked up at the stars. They were the same stars humans had looked at for thousands of years, wondering what was out there. Now humans knew the stars were full of life, full of conflict, full of danger, but also full of hope. 50 years after the Vexloran Armada was destroyed, galactic historians would note that not a single war of conquest had been fought during that time. Small conflicts still occurred, disputes over resources and territory, but the great empires that once crushed smaller civilizations had learned caution. The fear of what happened at Earth in those 1.7 seconds proved more powerful than any treaty or alliance. Humanity didn't conquer the galaxy. They scared it into peace. And then they worked, slowly and patiently, to turn that peace into something real and lasting. It wasn't perfect. There were setbacks and failures. But it was better than what came before. And sometimes, better is enough.